points that I think are worth bringing up. The most important of which is the importance of the relationship. The connection between the agent and the author is the closest that exists, I believe, in publishing. It has, because the agent is always working on behalf of the author, their interests are always enmeshed and invested in that of the author as well, in a way that it is not the same for publishers or anybody else in the industry. Editors increasingly will pick up an author for one project and then drop them for the next. That's quite common these days. Whereas with an agent, there are a couple of agencies who take on clients on a project-by-project basis. I don't think that's the right way to go, and I know most agencies don't. So it's very important. So it has to be, when you come to choosing an agent and that or deciding whether the agent you're speaking to is the one that you want, it really has to be somebody that you trust, that you get on with, that you like. It's like a friendship, and sometimes it's almost more than that. I thankfully have never been fired or had to fire one of my clients, but I've seen it happen to other agents, and whenever it happens, it's like a relationship breaking up. I remember seeing one happen on a telephone conversation, and the agent slamming the phone down at the end and saying, "Oh, I was going to fire him first, definitely." And it's exactly like sort of boyfriend-girlfriend breakup. It's that close, it really is. And Greg is an example here, but Greg and I, he's somebody that I would call a very close friend now. And we've, he's got now a 2-book deal with Orion. He's just delivered the first of those, which will be out in December, rather terrifyingly. But that's been a very happy situation. And since then, he has recommended a couple of other young historians to me that I've begun working with. So this is how it often works. There's some form of recommendation going on there. Now, there are obviously other ways of a relationship between an agent and an author coming together. Many of those you'll know. I mean, one of the most ridiculous situations for me was that I met one of my clients first at about 11 o'clock at a publisher's party. We'd all, there'd been plenty of champagne on offer. We didn't have very much to say except that we met. And she said she was looking for an agent, and our conversation went as far as, let's find a time to talk. But that was our first encounter. So there's all sorts of ways of doing it. I don't want to say that this is the only way, but I do want to make a point about recommendation in that it may seem in a way sort of example of patronage or another aspect of publishing being really backwards. But I don't think it actually is that. The recommendations I've seen or had have always come because the author in question has worked at it at some stage. They know people for a reason. It's not because, usually, not because they've been born into the right family. It's not like that at all. They've been to events, they've interacted with authors online, they've perhaps done work experience at various places to get an idea of how the industry works. This is what qualifies as research or preparation while you're mulling over your ideas and working on your writing. And I think it's increasingly important. It really does set you apart. It's an approach that I took myself slightly accidentally, but obviously with a different aim, getting into publishing. It wasn't that long ago that I began, but it was in an era that was pre-Twitter, it was pre-social media, and publishing websites were pretty dire, to be honest. But I did lots of work experience. I did lots of unpaid work experience at places like Viking and Profile and Portobello, and absorbed as much information as I could via that. And after that, I worked on the publishing side. I worked at Penguin Press for about a year, working with some enormous history books. None of them seem to be less than 900 pages long, which would have been fine had I not had to photocopy them all several times. And I did a lot of work on sort of humorous reference books as well. And from there, that's where I moved to AP Watt as an assistant. It was primarily because I didn't know anything about agenting, and I don't think a lot of publishers do. They're constantly asking me questions about how agents work, and I guess, I'm not secretive about what I do, or else I wouldn't be here, but they clearly think we are. So part of the reason I started doing work experience in agenting and just found I really liked it, but it was initially a research thing. I was thinking, I'd get back into editorial, but I should find out how the other half works in that way. And at AP Watt, there's not really an agent's training course. It doesn't really exist, which is part of the reason that we all work in different ways. But it is a sort of apprenticeship. So I worked with 3 different agents at AP Watt, and I learned from each of them in their different ways, and did sort of trained by doing smaller deals for their clients. So I would do negotiate fees for articles in newspapers, or audio rights deals, things like that. And that's a way of training to do the bigger things eventually, of course, watching what they, absorbing what they were doing. I just want to bring out 2 very general principles that I try to live by as an agent that are worth you keeping in mind as well. And the first is that reputation is really paramount. There's an old proverb that goes, a good name is better than great wealth, and I think that's no more true than in publishing. And there's a couple of reasons for that. The publishing industry is tiny. It's really, really small. You could broadly describe the entirety of English language publishing as a couple of hundred people in London and New York, and that's it. There are obviously outliers, but that's just about it. And we see and speak to each other on a regular basis. There are always events, always parties. We have lunch, we meet and speak, and obviously with social media, that's increased. And the industry is riddled with gossip. It's not always very nice, but sometimes it's just the passage of information, and that's how this industry is run in a lot of ways. An author's reputation is built by a number of things, and the most obvious